The Biden administration has approved a controversial oil and gas project in Alaska, located in the federally designated Natural Petroleum Reserve.
And it's big news here. It could eventually produce up to 180,000 barrels of oil a day. John Glasgow, he is live in the newsroom. He's got the details. John.
Hey, good afternoon to you guys. This is a scaled-back version of the ConocoPhillips $7 billion Willow project. Alaskan officials are celebrating the approval of the drilling project, but it's drawing fierce criticism from environmental advocates. So the project's fate has been closely watched as President Biden is trying to balance climate change while increasing domestic fuel supplies. More oil and gas drilling would help lower the prices. So the revised plan calls for 3 drills in sites instead of 5 and would include nearly up to 200 wells. So the state relies heavily on revenue from the oil production, but it's been in decline since the 1980s. The state's saying that the project will create hundreds of jobs and bring in billions of dollars of revenue to Alaska. Congresswoman Mary Patola, she responded with this statement: "I campaigned on getting this project done because I knew we needed it. It must reverse Alaska's economic decline. Today, the Biden administration made the right choice and put real energy progress over absolutism." So this week, Biden also approved new protections for undisturbed Alaskan lands and waters as well, calling for nearly 3 million acres of the Arctic Ocean to be off limits for oil and gas leasing. Environmental groups said that the president is trying to have it both ways on climate change. Listen.
You can't address the climate crisis while approving new fossil fuel infrastructure. You can't address environmental injustice while approving these massive facilities in these communities. And we just see it time and time again. But that's why we've taken the Biden administration to court time and time again, because, not only is the administration breaking its promises to the American people, but it's also breaking the law.
U.S. Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska says that the congressional delegation is expecting a legal challenge from environmental groups, so it's likely that this approval will be held up in the courts for some time. Sean, Emma?
All right, John Glasgow reporting live on that story from the New York newsroom. John, thank you. Meanwhile, Vivek Ramaswamy is a 2024 GOP presidential candidate and business entrepreneur. He is welcome back here to National Report. Vivek, good to see you. Thank you so much for coming on. So let's talk about that. This Willow project reportedly could produce 600 million barrels of oil over the next 30 years. The president approving 3 out of the 5 projects there in the Willow project. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I'd like to see that number be 5 out of 5, and I would say better late than never, but we're a couple of years late to this party. They should have actually relieved permitting long ago. The Biden administration waited as long as they could politically. We took this war in Russia and Ukraine and finally realizing that we actually have oil and gas limitations from the rest of the world, begging dictators around the world after Putin invaded Ukraine to produce oil in every other country except the United States, now finally getting to the United States as a source of energy. Well, you know what? I think that we need to take this to the next level. Actually, one of the things that one of the core aspects of my domestic policy agenda in my presidential campaign and hopefully in our presidency is unleashing the American economy. But the critical ingredient to do that is to first unleash American energy security and energy independence itself. And even vis-a-vis our geopolitical position against China, that's our #1 easy, low-hanging fruit ticket. And you see the far left now even complaining about this. That is why one of the things that the Republican Party needs to do a better job of is articulate the fact that we need to abandon this climate cult that is shackling the United States while leaving other countries untouched. And this is just one small step in the right direction, coming a couple years too late, but better late than never.
All right. Let's talk about another one of President Biden's initiatives. It has to do with a new executive order aimed at gun violence, reducing gun violence. We're going to see him expand background checks today. The announcement set for several hours now. He's out on West Coast time. Vivek, when it comes to your own campaign and the Second Amendment and how that plays into how you are addressing potential voters, where do you stand on that? And would you do anything different or support any changes like we've seen the Biden administration propose this executive order? Where do you stand?
Well, I'm an unapologetic supporter of the Second Amendment and an unapologetic supporter of the Constitution. The First Amendment is the most important, but the Second Amendment was second for another reason. It was the second most important because if you go to any other country in the world, from China to Iran, they promise you all the same rights or many of the same rights that the U.S. does, but you don't get them. You want to know why? The thing they're missing is the Second Amendment. Our founding fathers and our founders understood that deeply. That's why it's in there. But even as a pragmatic matter, people forget this. Gun ownership in the United States is about the same today as it was back even in the mid-'70s. Why has gun violence gone up? It's because of the psychological issues in our country, a mental health epidemic that has less to do with guns and more to do with the rise of other social factors, social instability. I think even the loss of these basic components of identity. I've talked about this, from faith, patriotism, hard work, family. When these things disappear, that's what contributes to depression and anxiety and a mental health epidemic raging in our country. And a core premise of my candidacy, the reason why I'm running, is to fill that void with the vision of American national identity that actually dilutes these poisonous agendas to irrelevance. That's actually what we need more of in this country.
Let's talk about this administration, the Fed, the Treasury Secretary, the FDIC stepping up to help out Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank. We just learning from the Wall Street Journal that we now know that the Department of Justice is investigating. The SEC is now investigating, saying this, quote, this is from the Wall Street Journal, either SVP was incompetent or this is a case of moral hazard, taking excessive risk and expecting political favors and bailouts. Taxpayers shouldn't vindicate SVP's political hubris, unquote.
That was your op-ed there, Vivek.
Yeah. That's right. That was my piece I wrote in yesterday's Wall Street Journal. This is cronyism all the way down. And I had a front row seat to this. I'll just lift the curtain for you guys a little bit. I was very vocal about this all weekend, that, you know what, Silicon Valley tech companies made awful decisions, self-interested decisions, because they got special favors in return for putting way too much money in Silicon Valley Bank. Well, you own the consequences of your actions. That's how capitalism works. Instead, the Biden administration applies two different rules to two different kinds of people. If that was an oil and gas bank in Oklahoma, would they bail out those depositors? No, they would not. But because this was Silicon Valley, because they're dancing to the right tune, because they're part of the Democratic Party donor class, they bailed out those depositors. And I think this is a shame. It's a stain on our national soul. And you know what? I got a lot of calls from that donor class, multi-billionaires in Silicon Valley over the weekend, trying to press me, would-be donors or would-be supporters, saying that they can't support me anymore if this is the position I take. Well, you know what? If I lose those donors, so be it. I'd rather still speak my mind freely. Thankfully, I've lived the full arc of the American dream and able to support this campaign personally. But it's also just going to take a bottom-up grassroots uprising to make up for it, of even $1 or $5 donors. That's why I tell people, go to Vivek2024.com. I don't care if it's $1, get in there. But what we actually need is a Republican Party that's unshackled from the chokehold of Silicon Valley. And that's why a lot of the Republicans have been quiet about this. It's their donor class, even in Silicon Valley, that actually pulls the strings. It's important we lift the curtain and see that for what it is.
All right. There have been a lot of viewpoints that have been expressed about the collapse of SVB. And you just heard from one of the 2024 presidential contenders, Vivek Ramaswamy, sharing his views. We appreciate you coming on today. Thank you so much.